So this, this My Story program is one of the more successful programs of TIE is where we invite an entrepreneur who has sold his company, his or her company, for more than $100 million in the last 18 months. And this program has been going on for more than 40 months now. And we have seen a lot of very, very successful entrepreneurs here. But our speaker today is unusual. We have heard from a lot of speakers who have sold their company for 300 million, 400 million, took their company public for $1 billion and all those kind of things. But our speaker today is unusual. He's unusual in the sense that before the age of 30, he had already sold, started and sold 3 companies. And the first company he sold was while he was still a junior at UC Berkeley. So he founded Kyber Systems in his junior year at UC Berkeley as a way to pay for school. Kyber was sold to Human Ingenuity in 1997. He then founded BridgePath in 1998, which was acquired by Bullhorn in October 2002. Also in 2002, he sold a website called GetRelevant to Lycos, the search engine. He then became chairman of the Stonebrick Group, which sponsored networking events in San Francisco area, and one such was called the Silicon Forum. So he is so one other tidbit about him is that he's known as an expert networker and described as catalyst because he often maps people to see how they fit into his social network. Hopefully he will talk about it a little bit more. He writes, in 2006, he founded another company called the RapLeaf, an online reputation management company. He served as its CEO until August 2012. And then a part of it was spun off as LiveRamp, and he became CEO of that. On May 14, 2014, Acxiom announced that it had acquired LiveRamp for $310 million. So he's not just a serial entrepreneur, a very successful serial entrepreneur, but he also writes a lot. He writes in Huffington Post, Business Week, and Quora also. And I heard that he also wrote an article on Council on Foreign Relations. So he's very active politically, and he happens to be a Republican. So if there are any Republicans here, is here another thing to talk to him there. So without further ado, please help me welcome Auren Hoffman.
He didn't tell you my social security number. It's 1067. So I'm gonna talk about 2 things today in my kind of prepared remarks, and then hopefully we can go through them quickly, and then ask any questions that you want to talk about as well. So we're gonna talk about 2 things. Kind of the 2 agenda topics are first, why picking a small niche is really good if you're starting a company, and then the second thing I'm going to talk about is kind of culture and growing talent. So those are a little bit of non sequitur topics, but those are the 2 kind of quick things I'm going to go over, and then hopefully we can get into anything else with the questions, et cetera, with anything else. So just at a high level, started LiveRamp, was there for 9.5 years, just recently left. So we sold the company in July 1st, 2014, and I just recently left in September of this year. So I'm going to give you the kind of LiveRamp story about why picking a small niche is really good, but I'm only current in the last. I'm not as current as I normally am because I've been gone a few months. So first, let me talk about picking a small niche. Before I do that, let me just explain what LiveRamp does, because it's a little bit esoteric. It's a weird kind of company, and then we can kind of talk about why picking a small niche is important. So LiveRamp's a middleware company. If you remember middleware companies like Tibco and all these other kind of middleware companies that were out in the 90s, LiveRamp's a middleware company for marketing applications. So it connects different marketing applications for B2C marketers together and moves data between these marketing applications. And LiveRamp clients today are large marketers. So Walmart, Gap, Citibank, Bank of America, American Express, State Farm, Verizon, AT&T, Sprint. So large, very large marketers are LiveRamp's clients. In fact, only large marketers are LiveRamp's clients. It doesn't serve like the small marketers or the medium-sized business, et cetera. So only really, really large marketers would be LiveRamp clients. And middleware is a really important market. For those of you not as familiar with middleware, it's an incredibly important market, and the reason why it's incredibly important market is that there's this huge trend in software where the number of software vendors that any given company has gone up dramatically over the last 10 years. So it's gone up about 10x in the last 10 years. The number of software vendors total has gone up 20x in 10 years. And that's due to a lot of you guys funding them or working at them or being successful at those companies. But the number of software vendors that a company has bought, so just take a random company, Best Buy. About 10 years ago, they had about 40 or 50 vendors. Now they have 400 to 500 vendors that serve them for software. The number of buyers within a company, so let's say the number of buyers who buy software within a company like Best Buy has gone up 12x in the last 10 years. So it used to be only the C-level people were buying. The CMO, the CIO, the CFO, et cetera, were buying software. Now, it's basically almost any professional in a company. Essentially, let's say anyone who makes $100,000 or up in a company is buying software. They're either directly buying software themselves or they're influencing the buy. So pretty much every software engineer is either influencing or buying software. Marketing managers, finance managers, HR directors, et cetera, sales managers are all buying software. And this is really good for startups because it's becoming easier and easier to sell into these enterprises, and they're buying more and more vendors. And then the budgets have gone up dramatically as well. The budgets have gone up about 4x in the last 10 years. So the dollar per vendor has gone down because there's so many more vendors, which is bad news for like the really, really large software vendors, but good news for startups. And so there's just lots of opportunities. Now, this is interesting just if you think of it as economically, if you think of an economic platform in the US, the budget for software for these companies has gone up about 4x. The budget for people has gone up 0x. So they're not hiring more people. And so these companies are making an explicit choice to basically replace people with APIs, people with software, et cetera. They believe the software is really, really valuable for their organization. And this is where middleware comes in. Because if you have, the more software vendors you have, the more you need them to talk to each other. Because now usually to solve a problem, before to solve a particular action, you would have one piece of software which would take that action from start to finish and would solve the particular problem. Today, you're usually stringing together 6 different applications together to solve an action. You may have to do a very simple action. Someone comes to your website, they do a few different things on your website, and then you shoot them an email. Right? This is a very common action that you might, based on what they did. Common action that a lot of companies might want to do. Just to do that one action, you usually have many, many vendors that are stringing together to do that one particular action. And there's many, many more things where you're doing that. And this is why middleware is becoming a really, really big theme. I think in the next 10 years, many of the largest companies are going to be middleware companies. And they're going to be sometimes they're going to be in very interesting niches. Which is what we'll be talking about today. So some other software companies that you may have not heard of, but I'm a huge fan of, is there's a software company called middleware company that you may have not heard of, but I wanted to bring your attention. There's a middleware company called Clever. And Clever is a middleware company for education software companies that sell to basically K through 12. basically that sell to public schools and et cetera. And there's tons and tons of education vendors, and these schools are buying more and more things, the software that goes on your iPad, the software that does this, the software that helps people, where there's this whole revolution within the ed tech space, and Clever's bringing them together. There's another company called Segment, which is an incredible company, maybe some of you use it, and they are they're basically stringing together all the analytics companies that you might need for your website. They're putting in one easy tag. You put Segment, and then you put all the other things on there, and you could test them, you can move them around, et cetera. So this is two examples of two companies that may not be on your radar, both of which I believe will be worth well over $1 billion very soon. I think there'll be companies that we'll be talking a lot about in the future. And there's middleware companies in every single type of industry and every single niche that's out there. There's going to be these middleware companies spring up as long as the same dynamics exist, where the number of software vendors is going up dramatically. Then we're going to see more and more middleware companies. Does that make sense? Cool. All right, great. So let me take it back to LiveRamp. LiveRamp was decided to go after this market of bringing together and moving data between all these different marketing technology software vendors. When we decided to go after the market was $2 million a year. That was the total revenues of middleware basically to move data between marketing software applications. Now, if you pitched a venture capitalist, and there are a few here, and you said to them, I'm going after a market, and the total addressable market, the TAM, is $2 million a year, most venture capitalists will tell you to go do something else. And they'll probably tell you something, they'll probably say it less politely. And my advice to you is to not listen to the venture capitalists, that the smaller TAM is actually a better place to start a business than a larger TAM. And now, the best place to start a business is, if you think of a Venn diagram with 3 circles. The first circle is very, very small TAM. The second circle is going to grow really, really fast. And the third circle is most people don't believe it will grow really, really fast, right? That's the best place to start a business. So if you see a small TAM, you think it's going to grow really, really fast, and very few people believe you that it'll grow really, really fast, that's where you want to start a business. The problem is those businesses are incredibly difficult to get funded, because if most people don't believe it will grow really, really fast, and it's a small business, it'll be very hard to convince them that it'll grow really, really fast. So you have these catch-22s, and that's why so few businesses get started in these places, et cetera, and it's really hard to do that. But if you can catch that wave, like we did at LiveRamp, it's absolute magic. Especially if you can catch a wave in something where, like a middleware company, where it makes sense to be only one winner. If you think about middleware, it's an integration company, right? And so if you're doing an integration, the more integrations you have, the more valuable it is to customers. The more customers you have, the more likely is people will integrate with you. And so you have this virtuous circle that works really, really well. And so in these cases, there tends to be one winner. There tends to be one dominant player that will have well over 50% market share, and maybe a few very, very small players that could potentially exist as well. Sometimes you have duopolies, but usually there ends up to be one, I don't want to call them monopolies, but one core company that has that really, really ends up being the dominant player. And that's a really good place to be if you're a company that's out there. At Live, one of the other advantages of picking a niche is if you pick a really, really niche-y thing, the companies around you who are in your ecosystem that are your partners aren't going to be scared of you, because they know that you're in this niche and you're only in this niche. And so it's really, really nice because you don't have a lot of enemies. And if you're a small company, you want to minimize the number of enemies you have. I think you should try to minimize the number of enemies to 0. That should be your goal, is to have as few enemies as possible, and if you get to 0 enemies, that's the best scenario. Some people don't think that way. So a lot of people out there, and I'm giving you some advice that most people won't give you. First advice is go after small TAM. You're going to hear that from maybe like 3 other people in the world, so that's the first thing, so don't necessarily listen to me. And the second thing is try to not make any enemies. Not making enemies. A lot of people say you should pick a competitor and you should go after your competitors and you should disparage all your competitors and you should, and my feeling is you should try to pick something where you don't have competitors. You should try to have less competition. And you try to make people get people to be your friend. One of the things at LiveRamp, which was very helpful to us, is we had all these people rooting for our success. And we were in a position where the most important company in our space, which was Google, it's the most important marketing technology company in the world, it's the biggest marketing technology company in the world, and every single company uses Google. It's basically everyone is almost pretty much every one of our clients was also a Google client. They were rooting for our success, and they were referring customers to us, and that really helped us scale. And let me kind of take a step back on the numbers. First year of LiveRamp, which was 2011, first full year of LiveRamp, we did $1 million in revenue. And this is SaaS, we're a SaaS company, right? Second year, we did $9 million in revenue. So we went from 1 to 9, and we did that with about 4 or 5 salespeople. Third year, we did $21 million in revenue, and we were profitable as a SaaS company. And I think at that point, we had maybe 6 salespeople in the company. I don't know if our 2014 and so third year was 2013. I don't know if 2014 or 2015 revenue has been public, but on the earnings call a couple of weeks ago, they suggested that LiveRamp was doing an $80 million run rate today, and profitable. First of all, you never see SaaS companies, you rarely see SaaS companies grow that fast, and you never see them grow that fast when they're profitable. You only see them grow that fast when they're extremely unprofitable. Most SaaS companies are extremely unprofitable for a reason. They're investing in growth. And maybe we should have been more unprofitable. Maybe we would have grown even faster, and we can debate about that, and maybe we should have been. But the reason that we're able to grow that fast while being a profitable company and also cash flow positive company is because we were able to leverage all of our partners to get our sales done. Sales are extremely expensive. If you think of every SaaS company that's out there, the reason why they're so unprofitable is because they're investing in sales and marketing. So if you can limit your investment in sales and marketing, or if you can augment your investment in sales and marketing to get other people to do your sales and marketing for you, in our case, for instance, companies like Google, MediaMath, Adobe, BlueKai, and many, many others were referring customers to us and saying, hey, you should use LiveRamp. Believe me, when Google tells you you should use LiveRamp, you're very likely to make that sale. It's a really, really good warm lead when Google tells you to go do that. That was really, really helpful to us. And so the main takeaway, and we can talk about this a little bit more, but my main takeaway is if you're starting a company, try to find a small TAM that you think is going to grow fast, and try to figure out ways where you don't make other people mad, and you basically can be as many people's friend as possible. But also, don't try to take their revenue. If Google, which Google has like 10,000 products or something like that, so it's really hard not to be taking Google's revenue. You have to really find a niche to not see any way where you could find a way to take Google's revenue somewhere, because they do so many things. And so we happen to be in a niche that there's no way that we would be taking Google's revenue. We weren't touching their media dollars, we weren't touching their dollars over here, et cetera. So we were good for them, but just because you're good for a company, they're unlikely to champion you and refer you if somewhere else in the organization, even if it's really far away, if you can hurt them somewhere, right? And so it's really important when you do that to think about these companies and think about everything holistically. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, great. Okay, and then the second thing I want to cover is kind of culture and talent. There's kind of 2 strategies for growing startups. The first strategy is probably the most common strategy, which is you're growing very, very fast, and so what you do is you pick a company you admire, let's say Google, everyone admires Google. You pick a company you admire, and you take management talent from them, and you just keep, and that's the way you grow really, really fast. Is you kind of identify a few companies. I really admire Salesforce. I'm going to steal their good managers and bring them to my company because I don't have time to develop my own managers. So that's one strategy. And that's been a very successful strategy that many, many companies who have been successful have employed. The other strategy, which is the LiveRamp strategy, is to try to grow your managers internally, to try to find talent and then grow them and build that talent better and try to grow those people internally. That's a little bit of an odd strategy today. That's what like big companies do. If you work for GE, they would be growing you internally. They'd be checking in every month or so on your progress. If you would be recognized as a superstar, they'd put you in different places. They'd move you around the organization, et cetera. But at startups, it's extremely rare nowadays to try to grow the talent. They essentially just buy the talent instead of really trying to grow the talent. Now, there's advantages to both. The advantage to buying the talent is you can get the talent in much faster. And if you're growing at hyper speed, let's say you're Zenefits and you have like 1,000 people and 2 years ago you had like 10, or I don't know how, they have had something like that, some crazy growth like that, then maybe that's the only option you have when you're growing that fast. But if you're growing steadier, you're growing quickly, but you're not growing exponentially, but you're still growing very, very quickly, then you have both potential options. One of the unseen potential advantages of growing people internally is you have this huge culture benefit. People tend to look up for their culture cues. So if you bring in a manager, they're more likely to changing the culture, at least for the people below them. And that could be good if you don't like your culture. But if you like your culture and you want to keep it intact and you want to keep the culture growing, then if you hire, let's say you hire an engineer and you grow them to be an engineering manager, and then you bring people underneath that engineer who's now an engineering manager, people will be looking up to that engineer for culture cues. Does that make sense? Now, if you grow your talent, this means you're likely going to have lots of people in your company that are inexperienced managers. So if you grow your talent, you're a startup, it's different if you're a GE and you grow your talent because it's a steady growth. But if you grow your talent at a GE, their employee growth year over year changes plus or minus like 2%, let's say, right? So the employee growth of GE is not changing dramatically. And so you have lots of opportunities to grow your talent. At a startup where let's say you're plus or minus, hopefully you're plus, you're not minus, but you're probably plus 50 to 100% per year. And you're growing at that rate, then you're going to have most of your managers are going to be very inexperienced by definition, right? If you have very inexperienced managers, you need to make some very significant culture changes to make that work. The first culture change you need to make is you need to make it less of a culture of active management and more of a culture of bottoms-up management, where the employee is almost managing their manager, and there's more of a culture of trust. In a company like GE, which has these very good managers, you could think that these managers are like they're thinking, okay, there's this Jim over here, and I'm really going to be thinking about Jim's growth path, and I'm going to be mapping out Jim's career for the next 3 years. I'm really going to be thinking about Jim and really, really helping Jim become a better person. That's what a really good experienced manager would do. An inexperienced manager, there's no way they're going to be able to do that yet, especially early on in their career. And so you've got to put the burden on Jim, which is in some ways, well, that's not fair to Jim. But I think that's maybe the only choice you have if you want to grow your managers. And it can be really empowering to Jim as well. The second thing is that when you push the responsibility down, you're essentially going to have a culture of trust. And that means that a lot of the controls that managers will normally be putting into companies, you can't put in. You basically have to have a default culture of trust. So, the core thing, has anyone here read the Netflix slide, the Netflix HR slides? How many people have read that? Okay, this is required reading. So if you do one thing after this particular talk, go home and Google Netflix HR slides. It's 100 slides that Reed Hastings, the CEO, put together. It sounds like a lot, but you can read it all in about 10 minutes. It is absolutely required reading for anybody, in my opinion. And it really talks about a culture of trust, how to build a culture of trust. What can you do to build a culture of trust? For instance, essentially what Netflix has popularized and a lot of other companies now have followed is, things like expense reports or, all these other things. And I'd been at companies before where the expense report policy was about a dozen pages long. You had to be amazing software developer just to understand the if-thens of and the loops and everything like that of the expense policies. Maybe some of you happen to work at companies like this. It's incredibly difficult to navigate. If you're in Philadelphia, you can spend X dollars a night if you're a hotel. If you're in New York, you can spend 1.5x. If you happen to be in Kansas City, you can only spend 0.6x a night for a hotel. It's like somebody went and figured all this stuff out, and now it's incredibly difficult to go do that. If you fly to this place, you can fly nonstop. If you fly to this other place, you have to pick the cheaper option. If a stop's the cheaper option, you have to go. Right? Maybe all of us have, they're somewhat Dilbert-esque, but they exist all over the place, and they exist for a reason. They exist because actually, some guy at some point, or gal at some point, abused it, and somebody was upset at this person and said, well, I didn't know, and so they created a rule. And then that rule begot another rule, and begot another rule, and begot another rule, and all of a sudden, you just have this whole long litany of rules. When we got acquired, this is a true story at Acxiom, I got the employee handbook. In the employee handbook, it actually says, you are not allowed to do cocaine on premises. And so I called the HR director. I'm like, don't you think that's kind of obvious that you shouldn't do illegal drugs in the company? Do you think we really hire anyone who doesn't know that you can't do cocaine on premises? First of all, hopefully they're not doing cocaine at all, but that you can't do cocaine at the workplace. Well, she's like, well, funny enough, and there's an anecdote, 6 years ago, there's some guy that we hired, and somebody caught him in the bathroom doing cocaine, and, well, we didn't have, good reason to terminate him. I'm like, what do you mean you didn't have good reason to terminate him? He's doing cocaine in the bathroom in your company, right? So we created this rule that you can't do and this is why all these rules show up. It's like somebody abuses the system and does the rule. If you have a company of inexperienced managers, you can't have all these rules. You basically need to have just a couple of rules. First rule is is do what's in the best interest of the company. That is a good rule. That covers all the spending things you need to spend. It covers tons of other stuff. Now, that also means, by the way, you have to hire people with good judgment. If you hire somebody and they think doing what's good for the company is doing cocaine in the bathroom, you failed in your hiring, right? And so you need to be hiring people with good judgment. And that is the X factor that these startups need to be, that startups need to be looking for. You're always looking for these incredibly smart people, these people who work very, very hard. You're looking for these core kind of traits that are really important. But there's this kind of X factor, which is people who have good judgment, which is extremely hard to interview for. Don't ask me a question about it because I don't really know. It's very, very hard to interview for. Yes, people with more experience are more likely to have good judgment than people with less experience, but there are plenty of 16-year-olds who do have good judgment. And so finding those people is really, really, really important if you want to grow a startup and you don't and you don't want to have all these rules. And rules, any rules in a startup, hamper the startup growth. The more rules you have, the slower you will grow. I can pretty much guarantee you that. In some cases, you need to have rules. In some cases, it's very, very important. If you're like a big nuclear power plant, I hope you have lots of rules. But I can guarantee you will not be a growth industry. Hopefully you'll be a safe industry, and that's very, very important, but you will not be a growth industry. If you're an airline, and hopefully most of us have probably flown on an airplane recently, airplanes have a whole checklist. They have a litany of rules that they have to do. And that's very good for all of us, because that the airplane is very unlikely to fall out of the sky, and that'd be really unfortunate if we were on one of those planes. And so the rules are really, really good, but the rules are optimized for safety. They're not optimized for growth. And when you're at a company, you want to grow. And now you also don't want really bad things to happen. So you want to grow very, very fast. So you want to not bound your upside with lots of rules, but you don't want terrible, stupid things to happen to your company as well. And the only way to protect your downside is to hire people with good judgment. You'll still have bad things happen. All companies do. You'll have some sort of terrible bug that gets into the code base because you didn't have like a formal review system or some other type of thing that you did. Or you may have now you have at maybe a big company, the commit rights. For those of you engineers, are very, very structured. At a small company, at a startup, like maybe everyone's got commit rights or something like that to code, and you're going to commit something that messes with your site and brings your site down or something like that. So you'll have these things that happen occasionally, but if you have good judgment, you'll eliminate a lot of the really, really bad things that happen while still protecting your upside. So with that, I'm going to open up to questions. We can talk about the culture things. We can talk about business model things. We can talk about anything. I'm not going to guarantee you I answer your questions. So if you ask me a really, really tough one, I might go on to the next one.
Do we have another? Okay. I'll start with the first one.
Okay.
So one of the founders of Thai movement is Naren Gupta, and his daughter, straight out of college, worked for his company. And she is only 27-year-old, and now she is vice president of product in your company. So it's not just what all that thing you said, you really meant it. How did you, what did you see in her? And when you promoted her, step by step along the way, was there any pushback from older people in the company?
Really good question. So Annika Gupta is the vice president of product at LiveRamp. She graduated from Stanford 5.5 years ago with a computer science major. We hired her right out of Stanford as a software developer at LiveRamp. For any of you any people here have met Annika before? So she's just an incredibly talented, you'll know, she's just an incredibly talented person. One of the most talented people I've ever worked with in my entire life. And someone who I'll probably work for one day probably soon at some point. She's going to be a great CEO. When we hire, we always try to hire extraordinary people. So that was the goal. We hire a lot of smart people, a lot of people out of Stanford, a lot of people out of Harvard, a lot of people out of a lot of other good schools. And so you're hiring for a reason because you think that they can do the job that you're hiring for. In her case, we're hiring her for an entry-level software engineer position right out of college. And we're very confident that she could do that job. She's incredibly smart, and it was, and within a month it was obvious that she could do that job, and so we're very happy that we hired her. I think when you hire people, you don't always know their core potential. So it's very hard to know that this person, in her case, she had an incredibly, way more potential than probably any of us thought when we were interviewing her. She's just an incredibly talented, incredibly smart person, and you just don't always know someone's potential. You're hiring for a particular job, but sometimes they can do way more than you originally hired them for. And we've all either were those types of people, or we've worked with those types of people before. And one of the things that we tried to do at LiveRamp is if we happen to get lucky, in this case with Annika and a few other people that we hired like her, if we happen to get lucky and hire one of those people, we let them grow. So, her first year, she was a software developer, then we promoted her to product manager, then we promoted her the next year after that to head of marketing, then we promoted her to head of product, and then we promoted her to vice president of product. And she has maybe, 40 people under her now. And I think when you find these high potential people, I think one of the things a lot of companies do is they end up layering them. And they layer them too early, too quickly, and then that stunts the growth of these people, and then they end up leaving your company because they're too high potential. They get frustrated, and they leave, and usually go start a company. And probably what she's going to do next, in my opinion, and maybe it's many years away, is she'll go start a company. She's an incredibly talented person. Hopefully she stays at LiveRamp for many, many years to come, but at some point, she's just a super high potential person. She'll go do that. And so what you want to do, if you get lucky enough to hire one of these high potential people, and you almost certainly will if you're hiring lots of people, is you need to identify them quickly and really let them grow. And your VCs will be very upset at you. They will say, this person, they're 24 years old, they're a superstar, we believe you, they're incredible, but you can't have them leading this engineering team, this so important engineering team. You need to bring somebody with more experience in, which is a very reasonable argument. But if you really find this high potential person, if you happen to be lucky and you hired Mark Zuckerberg instead of him starting Facebook, if you happen to have gotten lucky and hired him, imagine what luck would have been if you hired someone like as amazing as Mark Zuckerberg. Just let that person grow. And if they end up replacing you as CEO, that's fine. Right? It's Mark Zuckerberg, right? It's Bill Gates. You happen to get lucky and hire one of these people. So that's kind of my main advice is if you hire a high potential person, get out of their way and let them grow, let them make a few mistakes. Maybe they can't grow super fast, so you may not want to promote them to CEO the next day, but give them lots of responsibility and let them grow along the way.
And she's not the only one. His successor, the president of the division, is, 28-year-old?
That's right, yeah.
Amazing. Anyway, questions? Okay, let's start here.
So thank you for the talk. Appreciate it very much. So my question is about privacy. Crux, Newstar, Bukai, on the rest of it, and of course, LiveRamp.
Yep.
You folks, to some degree, make your money on marketing consumer data to e-commerce companies and brands, right? So against that, there is a privacy issue, which is maybe I don't want my data to be released. So tell me about the balance and how one as a consumer can restrict that.
Privacy is really, really important, and it's very personal. One of the hard things about privacy in the US is there are no written down rules about what you can do and what you can't do. One of the nice things about operating in France, and LiveRamp has an office in France, and we operate in France. In France, there's very, very clear rules about what you can do and what you can't do. And maybe you can't do as many things as you can do in the US, but at least they're very clear, they're written down. And so if you're an engineer, I'm an engineer, as you probably could tell from the way I talk, if you're an engineer, then it's like you just look at the rules and then you build code to solve the rules, right? And it's like, okay, well, we're gonna make sure we solve for this problem, and then you build the code and you solve for this problem. So it's really nice. In the US, there's much more gray in privacy about and you have to there's a judgment call all along the way about what you can do and what you can't do. And then the problem in the US is privacy is so personal. You'll find these people who they put everything on the web, but there's this one thing that they won't do because it's so personal. I'll give you an example. When I have a Jewish mother, so let me preface that, okay? When I go to New York, which is where I'm from, I never say on Facebook or Twitter or anything like that I'm in New York. And the reason is because my mother lives in New York, and if I don't come visit her when I go to New York, I'm in big trouble. And I like my mother, so I don't want her to be upset. But sometimes I'm only there for a day, and I don't want her to be upset, so I don't tell her I'm there, and I don't put it anywhere, and I hope she's not watching, and I don't put it on there. So it's a very personal thing for me that I don't put my location especially when I go to New York, for this very personal reason. And yes, it sounds trivial, but it would really be bad for me and bad for my relationship with my mother if it all of a sudden somehow got out there that I was in New York. And everyone has something like that. And sometimes it's really, really big, and sometimes it's really small, but it's very, very important to them. Other people are like, I don't care if I go to New York, if people know I'm in New York. Actually, I want people to know I'm in New York, because then my friends in New York will contact me, and we'll have dinner, it'll be really fun. And so there's things everywhere. The other thing I'll say about privacy is that I think privacy is making a comeback. There's a common belief that every year our lives are becoming less and less private and more open. And at some point, everyone in the world will know what we had for breakfast. I think that might not be true. If we think of the most successful consumer B2C companies in the last few years, they've been built on the backbone of being pro-privacy. So especially if we think of WhatsApp and Snapchat. The whole idea of Snapchat is to protect your privacy. And a lot of the idea of WhatsApp has been to protect your privacy. So I think that privacy is starting to make a comeback, which I think is really interesting. And I think the other thing that is a misnomer that people don't realize is people think that the 20-year-olds don't care about their privacy and the 40-year-olds do care about their privacy. I think it's the opposite. I think the 20-year-olds are really smart and they understand technology and they care about their privacy deeply, and the 40-year-olds probably just couldn't give a darn. And so the 20-year-olds they're moving to places like Snapchat because it is so privacy-centric. And that is the core theme of Snapchat. The rest of us, most of us in the room are old like me. We are like, our privacy's out there, we're okay with it.
So get you on the privacy. Is it okay, Vink? Yeah? I get you on the privacy because my wife is Indian, so anytime we go to Canada or London, we've got at least 100 family members to see, so we have to be careful. Thank you, first of all, for your time. Really appreciate it. You could be with your family right now, but instead you spend your time with us. I'd like your advice on raising funding, because I'm in the middle of fundraising right now. And you mentioned TIBCO. The founder of TIBCO is an investor in my startup. I have a smaller TAM within the security space. It's very niche, and I'm lucky because Nimish, Venk, and Prashant all believe in me and the TAM, but for most people, they don't actually get it yet, aside from my partners who are integrating us. What advice would you give to a founder pitching where they think the TAM is too small when they compare it to somebody like Symantec or McAfee? Because it's one product instead of 200 products.
Well, it's a good question. And you're lucky to have Vivek as an investor. He's an incredible entrepreneur. My core thing about fundraising, which is the same core thing I think about sales, is there's no sense convincing people about what you're doing. You just kind of tell them what you're doing, and then they either believe it or they don't. And you show them, and you give them, and I think it's the same for sales as well. If you're doing enterprise sales, you go into their office, it's like, whether you're just doing a demo or whatever, you say, look, I don't know enough about your company to know, I think this is good for you, and here's why, and I'm just going to show you what we got, and I'm going to be honest with you about what's going on with the product, and how the product is doing, and, et cetera. And then people either kind of opt in and they like it, or they opt out. And I think it's really important when you're raising money that people do kind of lean in and opt in, because you end up married with this person who's on your board for a really long time. And these things tend to take many, many years. I was, again, in LiveRamp for 9.5 years, so it was a really long time. And if you have board members that, if you somehow kind of like trick them to, joining, or you convince them with some razzle dazzle, and they end up investing in you, they might not be the best long-term partner. So, you may have to kiss a lot of frogs along the way, and you may have to meet with hundreds, and there's so many stories. We've all heard the Airbnb story, and we've heard many other stories where they had to meet with so many investors before they found one. Airbnb is crazy. Oh, like, people are going to come to your house? I mean, that's just insane to have thought. I mean, now it's like doesn't, but at the time it seemed really insane, and most people just didn't believe it. They couldn't believe, and there was no evidence of it because they didn't have lots of people doing it. And so it was really, really hard. So they finally found somebody who believed in it, but it took a really long time. And I don't think they convinced them. I don't think it was like their winning personality or anything. It's like now, once the person believes in what you do, then they need to, okay, is this the right team for me to invest in? Do they have the right strategy to go after this particular thing, et cetera? But if they don't believe in the market, or if they don't believe it, it's almost like they're not going to invest, and then you just move on. And I think that's good. In fact, if I was raising money, if I was you, I would have like a 10-minute call with them before you even show up. Because you don't want to drive all the way to Sand Hill Road for like some meeting. It's going to take you all this time to get, especially there's so much traffic nowadays. So just have like a quick call. You tell them what they're up to. You tell them what you're up to. If they like it, then you go. But you give them the chance, okay, just, hey, if you don't like it, let me know. I won't show up at your door. But if you, and by the way, there's only like 5,000 firms on Sand Hill Road, right, nowadays. So you just call enough of them, and now if 0 of them like it, then you've got a serious problem. But there's a lot of them out there, and you may have to go meet with tons of them to go do that. Just make your time efficient.
So I'm assuming that it took you about 3-4 years to get your product ready before you got your first $1 million in sales in 2011 or so, given that you're targeting such a small TAM and very targeted niche market. The question is how does a company like yours find kind of the early customers, somebody who will give you the advice and direction and help to define your product? Because defining the product might be the biggest challenge for a company like yours.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, I think it's really, I think that's really, really hard. I think those are like the missionary sales, and sometimes they're not sales. It's like use it for free, right? While we learn from each other, it's not free, right? You're just not paying me dollars, but you're paying me with your time. Because I'm going to be learning from you. So it's actually not free at all. In fact, you might rather pay me with your dollars than pay me with your time. But I'm going to go in, I'm going to be talking with you, I'm going to be all over you, I'm going to be, I'm going to be in your drawer, I'm going to be figuring everything out to go do that. And that's first of all, it's really hard to do. Second is, it's extremely rare you're going to be able to hire some person who has a sales in their title to go do that. Because they're really trying to go after the money. And so that's really almost what a product person I would have do. Either that's the CEO or one of the product people is really, they're doing the first missionary sales. And then doing the sale, but then they're getting the feedback back from the customer. And that's also a case of kissing a lot of frogs, because you're meeting with people and you really just need to have one person. So at LiveRamp, we had some initial traction in one particular area, and then we really wanted to break into big marketers, and we got lucky. We were meeting with some people at Walmart, and they had this very intense need. Walmart has this intense problem where they have 900 marketing technology vendors. Which is an insane number of vendors that they use. They probably use more marketing technology vendors than any other company in the world. And they're an incredibly well-run company, an incredibly demanding customer. And they were one of our very early customers. They paid us way less than they should have. They probably still pay LiveRamp way less than they should have if they're listening. But we got massive value back from them because they were very, very helpful with us about making they demanded that the product got better. And when Walmart calls you, they always call you screaming. They are upset, and which is a great customer to have, by the way, because you know that they care. The worst customer is the one that doesn't call you, right? And so they're calling, and we need this, and this is good, and this isn't fast enough, and this is broken, and this is over here, and this doesn't make any sense, and we need to integrate here, and this so slow, and you told me you were going to do this 2 months ago, and it still isn't done, and right, and that is a great customer to have. That motivates everyone in your company. It motivates you. They write you these nasty emails. You forward it to the whole team. It's like you let everyone know, because sometimes you know the average software engineer might be like one level removed from the customer, so now they can go learn about it, et cetera. But finding those is really hard to do. It's a very missionary, very evangelical sale where you're working with them. You're finding people have this acute problem. And then you're trying to help them solve this problem. And it's also hard because you can end up on these rat holes where you're solving something just for them and not for everybody else. So you need to be, this is why a product person is the core person rather than a customer success person. Because if you hire customer success people, they're incredibly good at empathizing with the customer, and their goal is to make the customer happy. When you have a product person, you want to make the customer happy, but you also want to do what's right for the long-term vision of the company, and that it means making the company probably does mean making the customer happy, but not making them as happy as they want to be. There's going to be some things that they're very unhappy about. You know, there's the famous, if you know the history of Salesforce, the famous Salesforce is when this huge customer came to Mark Benioff and said, we love your product, but we need it on-premise. And it was an $8 million sale, and that would have been like double his revenue at the time, and he didn't do it because he knew what the long-term vision is for the company.
What's your opinion about terrorism and hiding behind the shroud of privacy and including corruption? And that's where the privacy becomes, instead of privacy, openness becomes very important, and that's what's happening in the world today.
Well, that's a good question. Definitely above my pay grade. I'll try to answer it. I mean, there's this tension that exists in any good society between security and privacy, and it's I think a very healthy tension to have. You can move well on one side, which is bad, or well on the other side, which is bad. And so I think this tension is very, very good, and I think we have a good tension in the U.S. Sometimes we move too far on one side. In the 1940s, we interned Japanese in this country, which was way too far and way overkill. And sometimes we maybe are too lax, and so we ebb and flow even in the U.S., which I think has some countries maybe don't have as good of a tension, but in the U.S. I think we have a very good tension, and we argue about these things, and we argue about them in the public sphere, and I think that's healthy, and I think that's good. I don't necessarily have an opinion about where we should be on that scale. I haven't thought about it enough, but the fact that we're debating it vigorously is good, and the fact that we have very smart people on both sides of that debate who are very intelligent, who contribute to that debate, is also really, really good.
Hey, I have a quick comment about Clever because I'm familiar with the company being in the education space, and then I have a question afterwards. So I really like Clever, the integration that they're doing. One thing I don't like about them is that it hinders open source applications because they charge per school that uses your application rather than other things like API calls or something like that.
Interesting.
So that's my beef with Clever personally, because I'm building an open content platform for education. And on the topic of talent, I found that really interesting in the first question. So how do you decide as a CEO what kind of people to bring on board, and also as an entrepreneur, angel investor, et cetera, what kind of people you want to work with? How do you decide personally at that level?
Well, that's a really good question. I think it kind of depends on it also depends a lot on the stage of your company. So if you know exactly what you need to do, then, so for instance, let's say we're playing football, and we know we're going to be playing football for the next few years. Well, you probably need a really good kicker who can kick field goals, and you probably need a great kicker. That kicker's going to be really important. That's a very important position player, and we're going to spend lots of money on that kicker, probably millions and millions of dollars per year on that kicker, because that person is so important to the success of our company, in this case, a football team. But if you know even if you know you're playing a sport, but you don't know you're playing football, hiring that kicker could be a very, very bad idea. Because if you think you're going to play football and then all of a sudden you're playing basketball, that kicker may have no value to you at all. And so I think generally in a startup where you don't necessarily know exactly what sport you're playing, and you don't necessarily, it's not clear what you're doing, hiring the position player can be dangerous, and hiring the all-around athlete is maybe the better idea. When you know what you're doing, and when you're just moving fast, you're in super growth mode, then the position player can be a massive accelerant to your business. And so you have to kind of know where you're at. And I think a lot of startups, and also, sometimes advisors to startups and board members of startups are they give advice to hire the position player a little bit too early, and sometimes that works out. But if you have a slight change in direction, you can be left with this. Presumably position players are very expensive and they're very good at what they do, and you can be left with this very good person who just isn't right for your company, and that can be not a good situation to be in.
Thanks for your talk. Looking at your own journey for LiveRamp for the last couple of years, if you have an opportunity to do something differently, what would you do differently?
Ooh, there's a lot of things that I would do differently at LiveRamp. Let me start with the positive side. One of the things, I want to start another company, and one of the reasons I want to start a company is because it's so magical to work in a company where you like all the people, and you have these incredibly smart people, and you're working with them, and you're solving this problem, and you're in it together. That's just an incredibly magical experience. They had this party for me at LiveRamp recently, because it was like going away party, and it was like one of the best nights of my life. So has anyone here ever played this geeky board game called Settlers of Catan? Okay, like one hand. Okay, great. I love this guy. He likes Clever and Settlers of Catan. So this is my favorite board game. So we played Settlers of Catan, and we had my favorite pizza, and they gave me this picture book with all the pictures and everything, and they invited my wife, and on the way home from the party, I turned to my wife, and I was like, I don't know if I'll ever have this again. This was a magical time in my life. I want to be able to do this again and again. I think. So that's the plus side, and there's many other pluses at LiveRamp. I think we made there are some core strategic things that we could have done better around how to benefit everyone else in the ecosystem. So if you think of LiveRamp, one of the great things about LiveRamp is every time we bring on a partner, an integration partner, it helps the customer. And every time we bring on the customer, we become more valuable to the partners because we're sending more data. Like when Walmart wants to send, if Walmart now wants to send data to a partner, that partner is finding more value out of it. So that's really good. However, at LiveRamp, every time we bring on a new customer, we help the partner, but we don't help the other customers on the system. Maybe we do, because the revenue helps us invest more in the product or something like that. But in general, every new customer doesn't help each other. And I think there's things you can do in companies where you can actually share learnings from companies to other companies. And the way we design LiveRamp, we designed in a way where the data, like when Walmart, for instance, or American Express sends LiveRamp data, that data is siloed, and it's their data, and it's completely, it's completely locked away, and nobody except for them can access it or benefit from that. And that's very important to them, of course, because that data is very, very, it's very sacred. However, I think there's probably some learnings that could have happened from each of their data sets that could have made everyone else's data much better. And I think if you're doing that as a company, and if every time you get a customer, that customer helps every other customer, now I think you've got even a really, really cool flywheel that's going. Has anyone here heard of Cloudflare? Anyone in the DevOps space? So a few people here, great. So I love that company. One of the reasons I love Cloudflare is every new customer that comes onto Cloudflare helps everyone else. Even if you're free, most of their customers are free. I think like high 90% of the people who use Cloudflare are free. Are free customers. Every single person helps everybody else because you start to see, okay, you have this DDoS that came over here, you have this thing that came over here, you have this interesting traffic that came over here, and so the more places they're in, the more it helps everybody else. And that's a great, imagine having a company like that. It's like everyone is out there like rooting for you to get more customers so that they can be helped. So if we could have figured that out somehow, and we never really did, if we could have figured that out, that would have been really great.
He kind of asked my question, but I'm going to ask it a little bit more personally. Where do you see LiveRamp in 5 more years, and do you see yourself still being a part of it, or do you see yourself maybe being more of an investor in other types of companies, startups like LiveRamp?
Well, I left LiveRamp a couple months ago, so I'm no longer at LiveRamp. LiveRamp itself is growing astronomically fast, and so LiveRamp is part of Acxiom, is acquired by Acxiom about a year and a half ago, and it's growing really, really quickly. I expect that the LiveRamp growth will continue to grow really, really, really fast. It's the dominant player in the niche. I'm not sure if I'm even allowed to say what percentage market share we have, but it's really high. It's the dominant player in the niche. If you're in the marketing technology space, you know of LiveRamp, you're using it, you're integrating with LiveRamp in the marketing technology space, and that niche is growing really, really fast. So when you're a dominant player and the niche is growing at 80 to 100% year over year, and that probably will be that way for a long time, that's how fast it's growing, then I think you're in a really, really good spot. So LiveRamp is in a really good spot and has an incredible team of people. So you mentioned Annika, Travis May, and some of these other, Jeremy Litz, James R. They have these incredibly talented people at LiveRamp who are pushing it forward.
Hi, I just wanted to understand a little bit more about your experience because you're a serial entrepreneur. What was your founding team like, and was it important in raising funding, and was it really critical to grow in the company?
Yeah, so the question was around a founding team. Yeah, I mean, I think the team is everything. So the team around who you start your company with is everything, and it's the most defining thing. In our case, we there's probably the history of us would be written on it, but we had a big pivot. So we started in 2006. We pivoted basically in like late 2010. So kind of 4 years we pivoted, and then the second iteration of the company, the LiveRamp iteration, was very successful, but the team didn't. It's not like we needed a whole new team. So the team stayed the same. And that was really important. I mean, you see that in a lot of companies. So you see that in Slack, right? So Slack's just this incredibly successful company. It pivoted from a video game company before that, which wasn't very successful, but the team is the same. And so it would be really hard to do a pivot if you had a bad team or you didn't have a really talented team that's out there. Sorry? We had pivoted before the Walmart deal, but it was very, very helpful in making us successful. And it really was helpful in making our product better so that more people would want to buy it. It was a small revenue deal, but it was really helpful in making we had already pivoted, yeah. So we had pivoted maybe a couple of years before we had landed that deal. And so we had another business which we didn't think was going to be a great business, and so we stopped doing it and we moved to a business that we did think was a good business.